Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Bible for Kids podcast with your hosts, best-selling children's author Amy Parker and author and co-creator of VeggieTales, Mike Nawrocki. If instilling biblical values in kids is important to you, this podcast will give you the resources, wisdom, and hope to do just that. Now, let's join our hosts, Amy and Mike, for this week's episode.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Bible for Kids podcast. I'm Mike Nawrocki.
And I'm Amy Parker, and today we're speaking with author Bryan Davis about the Dragons in Our Midst series. But first, we like to start every episode of the Bible for Kids podcast with a Bible verse. Mike?
For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. And that's from Ephesians 6:12 of the New Living Translation.
That's always a good reminder. Bryan Davis is the author of fantasy science fiction novels for youth and adults, including the best-selling Dragons in Our Midst series. Other series include the Oculus Gate, Reapers, Dragons of Starlight, Tales of Starlight, Time Echoes, and Wanted Superheroes, several of which have been bestsellers. From the time he taught himself how to read before school age, Bryan has demonstrated a passion for the written word, reading and writing in many disciplines and genres, including theology, fiction, devotionals, poetry, and humor. Bryan lives in Western Tennessee with his wife, Susie. Bryan and Susie homeschooled their 4 girls and 3 boys, and they work together as an author-editor team.
Bryan, welcome today.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, wow. So great to have you on. And it's always so interesting to learn the background of our guests who create Christian content for kids. And you're absolutely no exception. You have a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. Is that right?
That is correct.
And work with computers for 20 years. Interesting. I come from a bit of an engineering. My dad is a mechanical engineer and my son is actually studying civil engineering right now. And, people think all engineers, they're just, just completely math people and stick to the thing. But there's so much problem solving that goes on and both, just the enjoyment of solving puzzles. And I think there's probably, a lot of that, when it comes to putting a story together as well. So can you tell us how sort of your training and thinking evolved into a writing career?
Well, sure. As you mentioned, my kids were all homeschooled. And we were having trouble with the writing curriculum. They really didn't take to our curriculum very well. None of them liked to write. So I decided, how about if we write a story together? Let's get together and we will have ideas and write a story. So every week I would have a chapter done and read it out loud. And then the kids would chime in on what they think should happen next. Mm-hmm. And I'd try to put it in the next chapter. And the story evolved and got bigger. And it really helped a lot. They all now enjoy writing in one form or another. But the one who got really hooked on writing was me. I saw how much fun storytelling could be and how important it was for teaching. Because as a dad, I wanted to put virtues in my stories and heroic characters. And I saw that it was actually affecting my kids in a positive way, that they wanted to be like these heroes.
Yeah.
So I decided this might be a good career move for me to have a greater impact on people by being a storyteller.
And was that a cold turkey decision, or was there sort of like a feathering in of careers at that point?
There was a melding. I knew I wasn't a real good storyteller at the time. I was academically good at writing, but not really good at storytelling. So I started getting books on writing and going to seminars and got in a critique group. And I learned that I had a lot to learn. So over an 8-year period of learning and trying to get published, I learned that I had a long way to go. And finally, after 8 years, is when I found a publisher who was willing to take on my work. Mm-hmm. And actually, it was about a year before that I quit my job to pursue it full time, which is another story in itself, the faith that it took to do that. But it was definitely a journey. It wasn't a one-time thing.
Yeah. Okay, it's time to now be a writer and go.
And I think that's the case for most people. And you talked about something that that struck me. You talked about how you were technically a good writer, but you weren't a storyteller. And this really isn't a podcast about writing, but talk about that a little bit. Because people will tell me all the time, kind of the opposite. They'll say, oh, well, I can't write, but they have stories that they want to tell. And I always tell them, you don't have to know all the English rules in order to be a good writer. You have to be a good storyteller. So you're sort of the opposite of that. You knew all the rules, but you felt like your stories were lacking in some way.
Yes, I knew all the rules as far as grammar. I was good at English in school. And, I'm probably one of those nauseating grammar police you run into.
You are my people.
Yeah. So
oh man, I couldn't spell my way out of a paper bag. I don't even think I could spell paper bag.
Mike is a great storyteller though. And I haven't noticed that he can't spell. So.
But I was always the academician. I was always, I knew story, sentence structure, but I didn't understand about, like a hero's journey and setting up the conflict and setting up the crisis and the object of desire and all those things. I didn't understand how all of that worked. So it was a learning process to get to be a storyteller.
And I love that you say it took 8 years too, because so many people think that this business is instant. You became a bestseller overnight and that does happen, but that is usually the exception and not the rule. I became a bestseller overnight after 20 years of.
Right. I have a folder filled with more than 200 rejection notices to prove that it was quite a journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's always good to look back on and keep you humble and remind you that you're always learning. You never master this process at all.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And your bio mentions, speaking of that, you and your wife are a writer-editor team. So in one way, that sounds like a pretty natural fit. Women are pretty good at editing their husbands in all kinds of ways. But it also sounds like you're kind of asking for trouble there. So tell us how you two work together to create these stories.
Well, I'll finish a first draft. I'll go through the entire story and say, okay, this draft is done. It's ready for my wife to see. And then I'll send it to her and she'll send it back to me just completely filled with comments and corrections. and I'll be saying, very good at spotting errors. But she does everything on the computer. So then she'll send it to me in a computer format where everything's tracked and her comments, and she always does a great job. And we just go back and forth several times. I will edit, change them, make the changes she suggested, then send it back to her. And finally, the last edit process is she'll read the whole thing out loud to me.
Oh, wow.
And
but that's such an important step too.
It is, because when you hear it, it's a completely different presentation and you catch so many other problems, especially repeated words. I use that word 6 times on that page.
Yeah.
So what is your word? Every writer has his or her word. What is yours?
I use skulk too much.
Skulk?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Wow. Yeah. Wait, I'm going to get my thesaurus out real quick.
Mine is just or really.
The unusual words stick out more when you repeat them.
That's true.
Now, have you discovered the read back function on Word, on Microsoft Word? I use that all the time. It's a bit more computery than your wife's voice, I would imagine. But
so it certainly is. What's neat about my wife reading out loud is that sometimes she'll make a mistake and read a more natural word than actually happened.
Yes, which does not happen with Word. Yeah.
Right. So I say, is that what I wrote? And she said, no, I missed it. I said, I like yours better because it was more natural. It's what she expected.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I discovered early on as a writer is the difference between what I think I'm communicating in my head and what is actually, coming out. And for me, that happened with screenwriting first. You're putting it down in a screenplay, and then by the time it gets translated visually, sometimes it's like completely different than what I was intending. And so, just that the whole communication process in writing is something that you have to learn as a writer. It's like it's not a direct connection of words equals ideas. Sometimes the idea the words need to be tweaked, to get to that original idea you were going for.
In the out loud reading, I also get to hear her inflections, and she might emphasize something that I didn't mean to emphasize, and it does give it a different meaning.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was just going to say, that's why we need editors, because we hear what's in our brain and we think it's the same thing as what's on the paper. But an editor or any kind of fresh reader will read that and say, what did you mean by this? Because they don't have the context of your brain.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the process works well. She's a wonderful editor and very patient with me. So it's great being teamed with her on that.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and take a short break, and we'll be right back with Bryan Davis on the Bible for Kids. My Arms Will Hold You Tight, a whimsical board book from mother-daughter writing duo Crystal Bowman and Terry McKinley, is filled with masterful rhymes and beloved animals, including llamas, elephants, sloths, and fun surprises like bats and flamingos, that brings the tenderness of heartfelt love between baby animals and their parents to life. A perfect gift, this book will appeal to the whole family and is sure to be a favorite book of mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and other caregivers to read to their precious little ones. My Arms Will Hold You Tight is available now wherever books are sold.
From the creators of the 1-year daily acts of friendship comes 100 daily acts of friendship for girls. Strong, healthy friendships offer a safe place for girls to be themselves and share their deepest feelings. But how do they build lasting friendships? One of the key ingredients to having good friends is learning to be a good friend. Designed for girls 8 to 12, 100 Daily Acts of Friendship for Girls teaches what God says about friendship and will give them practical, everyday tips for developing lifelong relationships. Each devotion includes a scripture verse, a short story about friendship, questions to ponder, and a daily act of friendship section with ideas for living out what they have learned. Girls will not only learn how to develop godly friendships with others, but will discover how to be friends with Jesus, the friend who will never disappoint and will always stand beside them. 100 Daily Acts of Friendship for Girls is available wherever books are sold.
We're excited to let you know that all this week, you have the chance to help keep the Bible for Kids podcast going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. And that's by giving a donation to christianparenting.org. The Bible for Kids podcast is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which we like to say has a podcast for every parent. But reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month comes at a cost, which is why I hope you'll give a special donation today. Please give generously today by texting CP Give to 474747. That's CP Give to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So please give a special donation this week to keep the Bible for Kids podcast and Christian Parenting going strong. Welcome back to the Bible for Kids podcast, and Amy and I are speaking with Bryan Davis.
So, Bryan, we're talking about your Dragons in Our Midst series, and that has grown to be really popular with both kids and adults, as it seems that any good fantasy series does. So give us just an overview, introduce us to that series. Tell us, sort of how many books there are, who the characters are, and what kind of, what the premise is and what kind of adventures they see in the series.
When I talk about it, I usually tell people it's about two teenagers who learn they have parents who used to be dragons.
Oh, wow.
And because of that, they are developing dragon traits. And there's a modern day dragon slayer who's out to get them because of that. Now, these two teens are named Billy and Bonnie. They're both about 14 years old, and they're not related, not brother and sister, they're not even friends when the story starts. But it has a King Arthur backstory about when the dragons transformed into humans, and it explains why it happened and how these dragons turned into humans lived for hundreds of years to get to the current time to have these teens who are now in danger because of their dragon traits. So that's how it starts, and it even has a flashback chapter to show the transformation. So that makes it a lot of fun.
Wow, that's really cool.
There are four books. There are 4 books in Dragons in Our Midst.
Well, and and I wanted to ask you about what inspired you to write fantasy. I remember growing up and just being a huge fan of fantasy. Of course, starting with Narnia and Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Loved that. Sort of Shannara, or as I've learned later, it's Shannara. But I just kind of loved, as a kid or a young adult, love that epic fantasy, that idea of being on a journey, of that battle between good and evil, and then later, sort of gotten into this present darkness, and Frank Peretti books, talk about the battle, the spiritual battle. But what inspired you to write fantasy, and why did you choose to explore, within that genre, concepts of faith?
Well, you remember I mentioned that I wrote a story for my kids, and it wasn't fantasy at all. It was contemporary. It was had a lot to do with our family, going on an adventure. Something that never got published and never will. But as I was seeking learning about writing, I had a dream one night about a boy who could breathe fire. Woke up from the dream knowing there was something special about it. So I told my oldest son about it.
You hadn't just had onions for dinner, had you?
It was pepperoni pizza.
Oh, okay. See, that'll do it.
I told my oldest son about it, and he said, "Dad, you should write a story about this boy who can breathe fire. Because then if you did, it'd be a lot better than that other stuff you've been writing."
Oh, no. Boom.
What? Yeah, 13-year-old boys can be quite
brutal. Yeah.
Kids are the best editors.
Yeah.
So we then brainstormed. I said, "Well, how could a boy breathe fire?" And he said, "Well, how about if his parents are dragons?"
Wow.
And I said, "But dragons don't have human children." "Dad, it's fantasy. We
You can write your own rules, man."
That's right.
That's where the engineering degree comes in.
Well, you see, he was a fantasy reader. He had already read the Lord of the Rings about 10 times by that time.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So we just brainstormed the concept, and I started writing it, and that's how I got into fantasy.
That is so cool.
I love that so much, that it was your son who so many times we need to look to them to see how to truly be creative and, sort of break down some of those rules that we create.
That's absolutely true. I bounce my stories off my kids even now. Even though the youngest is 24 now, they still have really good ears for hearing what's a good story.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel too, like within the genre, there's such a clear distinction of good and evil and right and wrong. And have you found that to be important too, just in terms of those faith elements?
Well, absolutely. Not just good and evil, right and wrong, but just dark situations and bringing the light into it, and having courage in your difficulties and facing obstacles that seem insurmountable. All of that translates to real life, even if it's fantastical. And the neat thing about fantasy is you can make those things larger than life. And then readers will go, "Well, my troubles aren't that bad."
Right.
And then they can apply the same faith and courage to their lives as they see in those stories. I've seen it time and time again in what readers write to me in emails and letters.
Well, and that was actually my next question, and you may have already answered this, or you may want to expound on it. Some of those faith concepts that you explore, we mentioned good and evil, and right and wrong. Are there any other faith elements that you talk about, or is it pretty much just that battle between good and evil?
Oh, very much so. There's more. The Bible verse you had at the beginning about battling with spiritual forces, that comes in a lot. Knowing that there's invisible realities out there, but not only just the dark ones, but also the ones of light that will be there to help you. You're never alone. You can always count on it. There's always hope, and all of these themes are throughout my stories. Sacrificial love always reaps benefits. I could go over that for a long time about all these themes. And another one that really resonates is mercy and forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that also reaps benefits, not only for the forgiven, but also for the forgiver. So those themes abound in my stories.
That's great. And I found that, covers are very important, especially for kids, to kind of draw them into the books. And how do you choose your scenes for each cover? Is that a decision you make, or is that done in conjunction with the publisher? Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, different publishers have different guidelines on how much the author can bring in. This series was originally published by AMG Publishers. Now Tyndale is taking it over. And they just asked me, what do you want on the cover? So with Raising Dragons, the very first one, I gave the illustrator some guidelines on which scene I wanted, and he drew something that was kind of different from what I had in mind. So I liked it so much, I actually wrote an added scene to match that cover design.
That just happened to me on a cover.
Yeah. And then the second book, it was I picked one of the most dramatic scenes in the story, and the illustrator did match that one very well. So it's different. It's different for every cover. Sometimes I follow the artistry of the cover designer, and sometimes they match it perfectly. And with Tyndale taking it over, they made all new covers, and they went more thematic than actual a scene in the story. They picked some themes from the story, some devices from the story, and so it's different every time. And they did a great job. I love the new cover designs that they have for the new release.
Well, and that just shows again, like you writing the scene that the illustrator, provided. That just shows again the importance of just working together. That creative process of collaboration, of how, the sum. We're more than the sum of two parts. When we collaborate. But
Sure. I'm a writer. I'm not a cover designer. No. I know that I can't do that. I can't. And I'm not an editor. I never want to be one. And I really appreciate the talent that it takes to do all these pieces. And I have one piece and other people have other pieces. So it's definitely a team effort.
Yeah. And I think it also speaks to just the power of the written story and the ability to spur the imagination in readers, because having, kind of being on the both sides of the I don't know if it's a fence or what it is, but just in terms of, a screenplay writer and a book writer, it's like a lot of times you understand why people who have written or read the book are disappointed in the film because it didn't really capture the picture that they had in their head. It wasn't as rich and magical getting that on screen. So it's that visualizing what is written is so individual a lot of times, and it's neat to see when you're a writer that somebody else can improve on the visual that you had in your own head.
Yeah, I usually love seeing the covers. They excite me and say, "Wow, when they capture it, it's a really exciting thing."
Yeah.
Well, we are going to take another break, and we will be right back with Bryan Davis on the Bible for Kids podcast.
Kids have a lot of questions about God, faith, and the Bible. Why did Jesus come to earth? Who wrote the Bible? What is faith? If you're looking for a great resource to answer some of kids' toughest questions, check out The Big Book of Bible Questions by best-selling author Amy Parker and apologist Doug Powell. With sound theology in kid-friendly terms, Amy and Doug tackle 60 questions covering the Old and New Testaments. The vibrant, playful pictures bring each answer to life and make this book even more fun for kids to read on their own. Plus, you'll love having this book at your fingertips during your family devotions or for those moments when you might need some help with answering your child's questions. The Big Book of Bible Questions is available now from your favorite bookseller.
The Bible for Kids podcast is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which we like to say has a podcast for every parent. But reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month comes with a cost, which is why we hope you'll give a donation. Please give generously today by texting CPGIVE to 474747. That's CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting CPGive, that's cpgive.org. Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So please give your donation before time runs out to keep the Bible for Kids podcast and Christian Parenting going strong.
Welcome back to the Bible for Kids podcast. Amy and I are speaking with Bryan Davis.
So, Bryan, you've received some pretty impressive feedback and testimonies over the years from kids and adults who have been impacted by your book. So we want to hear some of that feedback and how reading these books have changed their lives, and just tell us about some of those.
Well, I get lots and lots of emails and letters. Back before email was popular, I'd get letters in the mail telling me, your books have drawn me closer to God. I'm back reading my Bible again. And it's wonderful getting all those. But the ones that really strike me are the ones where it's a kid will say, I became a Christian because of your books. Wow. And my parents aren't Christians. What do I do now? And I'll get a 17-year-old girl in Grand Rapids said that her father was abusing her and was turning toward her sister, and she got the courage from my characters to report him to her mother. And I've heard from 20 different teenagers. I keep track of these. 20 different teenagers who've said, your books kept me from committing suicide.
Wow.
So it's been amazing. I'm literally hundreds upon hundreds of emails like that telling me, your books have made a difference in my life.
Wow.
And that just shows, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's just amazing. I was probably going to say the same thing that you were going to say, Amy, or close to it. Just the power that stories have, particularly stories that are informed by God's truth and God's word, to really impact kids' lives.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And that we just don't ever know. We feel like we're writing stories and putting commas in the right places and stuff like that. And we just, when we really just open up and let God guide the process, He has a purpose and He has an end game for our stories. And you would never think, writing about dragons would keep a child from committing suicide.
Well, I absolutely agree with that God guides. He guides me all the time. I could tell you stories about the guidance I've received, but there's also an intentionality to it. I definitely seek and plan to write about very difficult circumstances and dark places that the characters have to go. Because so many readers out there, especially young readers, are now in dark places. They don't understand what's going on, and they need light. So when you write about dark difficulties that require courage, intentionally doing so, the readers identify with that and say, I'm there, I understand. Now give me hope, now give me light. And I do that intentionally in my story. So there's both a design and a guidance that goes along with it.
Yeah. And I think in this industry too, we tend to shy away a little bit from discussing the darkness at all. And that I'm glad you even mentioned those testimonials, because that's just evidence of why we need to go there, why we need to talk about the things that maybe, quote unquote Christians don't talk about, or the difficult things. Like our kids need guidance there too. And if we shy away from that, and if we don't address it, and if we don't show them the light that is on the other side of the darkness, the world is going to show them, the darkness on the other side of the darkness, or whatever. They're going to give them a worldly answer to problems that are, as our scripture said earlier, they're spiritual issues. They're not flesh and blood issues. So I think what you're doing is so important.
Well, yeah, and I think it comes down to gifting too, and where God has the area in which God has gifted you as an artist. It's so hard for me to even to even have a voice in that space. I'm just like a happy-go-lucky cucumber. I remember being in college, and I was taking some painting classes, and I was really drawn to the beauty of in the angst of German expressionism, when I was in college, and I tried to paint like that, and it was like, it's not working. I'm just too happy. I'm too happy to do that.
But
so to be able to be
that too, obviously
to be able to be kind of gifted and have a voice that kind of is in that space to reach people and kids who are going through that is a gift, and and God uses us all differently in the arts to be able to reach different folks.
Absolutely.
Well, and the genre of fantasy lends itself well to this. I mentioned it before that you can make things much bigger than life in fantasy. For example, in The Darkness, I have a character, because she ate from the tree of life, she was going to live forever, and she ended up being alone, totally alone for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
You can imagine being alone, completely alone in a dark place for 1,000 years. And the readers are going, I can't imagine that. And she overcame it because of her faith. And so the readers are going, well, if she can do that, then I can do that.
Yeah. So
fantasy makes it larger than what you'll ever have to face. And that's why I love the genre.
Yeah. Well, so the Dragons in Our Midst series is one of several different series that you've written. Can you tell us a little bit about the others? Are they all fantasy, and are they for different age groups or reading levels?
Well, they're all speculative fiction. That's an umbrella for fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, supernatural warfare. One series that's actually a sequel to Dragons in Our Midst is Oracles of Fire. Mm-hmm. There are 4 more books in that story world. And then yet another sequel series called Children of the Bard. So there's 12 books in the Dragons in Our Midst story world, and they're all fantasy. Basically the same characters having new adventures.
Okay.
I also have, you mentioned the Reapers trilogy. It's a dystopian tale. Mm-hmm. Dystopia is very popular right now, and I wanted to write a story that had the similar amount of darkness, but would end in the light. Mm-hmm. And that one is for teens, 13 and up. I have a science fiction series called The Oculus Gate. That is my newest series, and it isn't finished yet. That is a post-apocalyptic science fiction, also for 13 and up. Mm-hmm. I have a series called The Time Echoes. It's a science fiction murder mystery.
Oh, wow.
Also for teens, jumping through portals in a multiverse, trying to solve a murder.
Nice.
And if you like a mind-bending story that you almost have to take notes to keep up with, that's for you.
Plenty of wormholes.
Yes.
What was that one called?
The Time Echoes.
Time Echoes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Also, Wanted Superheroes. I wanted something for the younger ones, 8 to 12-year-olds. It's a trilogy about a boy who is a genius, and he creates a device that he thinks will give him superpowers. But it doesn't work on him. It works on his 8-year-old sister.
Oh, no.
So they team up to battle a villain. It's a really fun story. And I think I covered them all. I have a standalone book called Let the Ghost Speak. That's for adults. It's a mashup of historical, supernatural suspense thriller.
Very, very cool.
That's a mouthful. Say that again.
Well, it sounds like you keep pretty busy.
Yeah.
How often do you have to change over your keyboards?
Well, this is my 4th keyboard.
Oh my gosh, you're serious.
I sense a lot of pressing of buttons going on these keyboards. I know they give up after a while.
And I hit the keys hard when I get excited.
Oh, do you like the spring? You like the true spring keyboards, or are you okay with just like a $80 off the rack keyboard?
I definitely get the off the rack. I go through them too quickly.
That's great.
And so, as you develop these concepts and these books and these series, what is the one thing? What is, I guess, the one theme that runs through them all? What's the one thing that you hope families learn from your books?
There are 2 actually that I point to that I'm very intentionally put in. One is sacrificial heroism that is founded on love. That love conquers all. That courage that comes from that love and sacrifice is what brings rescue and light. That's the theme of all of salvation, is sacrificial love. And the second one is forgiveness. As Jesus said, he will forgive us as we forgive others. And we learn that sacrificial love leads to forgiveness. The two go hand in hand and cannot be separated. So those themes are throughout all my series. I never write one without both of those themes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really important. And those are themes that this age reader probably needs to be reminded of often. Both forgiveness, because, they're coming to an age where they're making decisions where they mess up a lot. And so that forgiveness is important. And then also just that sacrificial love, like how we're supposed to treat one another, and then, what Jesus did for us. So those are,
that's for sure.
If families all walk away with that, then we'll be in a good place.
I totally agree.
Well, Bryan, we really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell our listeners how they can connect with you and find all of your books?
Sure. My website is Davis Crossing, Davis is my last name, Crossing, CROSSING.com. And it has links to all my social media, Facebook and MeWe and so forth. And sign up for my newsletter is there as well.
Fantastic.
Awesome. And listeners, we are always giving away free stuff on our socials. So go follow us on Instagram or Facebook at The Bible for Kids, or on our website, thebibleforkids.com. See you next time. Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Bible for Kids podcast with Amy Parker and Mike Naraki. Be sure to connect with The Bible for Kids on Instagram, Facebook, and at thebibleforkids.com. The Bible for Kids podcast is powered by the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Find out more at christianparenting.org. Our show is also available on waynation.com.
Christian Parenting.